everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, one of the hot spots that we've talked about on numerous occasions looks like it's getting hotter, and that has to do with especially the border between Turkey and Syria and the involvement of the Kurds. And all of a sudden, the United States and Turkey are talking about a safe zone, a no-fly zone because of the chaos there. And from my viewpoint, this may be a significant escalation. Time will tell. But in the meantime, it looks like Turkey especially would like to get NATO involved. Since they're a member of NATO, get NATO involved, then it's a NATO function, just like it is in some other countries, I believe in Libya and also in Afghanistan. And look how well they have turned out. So they're looking for help from NATO. But there's a lot of ands, ifs, and buts about exactly what this zone is. The size of this special zone is 68 miles long and 40 miles wide. And all of a sudden, it's going to be a safe zone. What do you think the odds of this really helping the situation there be?
It's funny how they use such cleverly worded terms like safe zone, because to have a no-fly zone, as we knew from Iraq, where that was supposed to prevent war, and that didn't do very well. But a safe zone, a no-fly zone, means that the U.S. military and the Turkish military will have to bomb and take out all of Syria's air defenses. There's only one side that would be flying there, and that's the Syrian government, which is bombing ISIS. So the U.S. will remove the Syrian government's ability to bomb ISIS by bombing Syria. This is the exact thing in 2013 they wanted to do. They wanted to bomb Syria, and the American people said no, and now they're coming back to it.
Well, now let me see if I get this straight. The Syrians want to bomb ISIS. Don't we want to bomb ISIS too? I mean, what's going on here? I think there's a big mixture there, and also maybe the reason why we have such chaos in that region.
I'm sure you remember it was just a week or so ago that there were so many articles written. We found our boots on the ground. It's the Kurds. The Kurds are fighting ISIS. They are sending him back, beating him on the battlefield. And now the Turks, over the weekend, were bombing the Kurds.
Yeah, so and the Kurds are an ally of ours. We give them weapons and we support them.
Exactly.
So, I looked back to find out when this new event started. And I think it was in 2011 when our president, Obama, said Assad has to go. And one thing he said is that the future of Syria should be determined by its people. And that was one of the reasons they were going in. Now, it looks to me like the policy hasn't done very well. It looks like many countries are involved and outsiders. And who represents the anti-Assad faction? Does anybody know the number of factions that are involved in fighting Assad?
And the fact that they aren't Syrians for the most part. They come from places like Qatar and from Yemen and elsewhere. So there is no future of Syria being decided by Syrians. These are outsiders.
But this motivation, Assad, you can't defend him necessarily, but we can condemn what's happening as a consequence of people going off half-cocked. Because you have United States want to get rid of Assad, the Turks want to get rid of Assad, Israel wants to get rid of Assad, and they get along now. It just happens that Iran doesn't like ISIS. They're willing to fight ISIS. But they'd just soon not destroy the regime of Assad. And they're going to sort this out. This is to me is the grandest of all grand entangling alliance of the many countries. It's a good reason why our founders didn't like us getting involved. But just think of this, all these countries getting involved, and where is it going to lead? And one of these days, one of these events are going to break loose.
Fighting your allies and your enemies at the same time, it's just like something that a crazy person does. But, they claim we need this safe zone because we need to have a safe place for all of these refugees.
Right.
But nobody looks back and says, where do these refugees come from? People weren't fleeing Syria in those kinds of numbers during Assad's rule. It was only until the U.S. decided on regime change and caused all this chaos that people left. So we caused the refugee problem, and now we want to bomb Assad so that we can solve the refugee problem.
Yeah, and the odds of that happening are essentially slim to none. And it'll be interesting to speculate on what NATO will do, because I think tomorrow, Tuesday of this week, they're supposed to meet and make a decision on whether this is a legitimate request by a NATO member saying their borders are being invaded and disturbed, and they want their national security secured for their borders secured by NATO. And sometimes I think NATO is nothing except sometimes is a cover. Mm-hmm. You know, NATO didn't fight the war in Korea and these different places, the United Nations. They don't do it. It's always the Americans. But now they're talking about, NATO giving sanction to this. And that, of course, will give cover to the people who want to escalate and do the bombing. And I imagine we still have a few neocons who haven't backed off, even though they're a little bit softer about American troops on the ground. You know, that's not popular for any country. Nobody wants to send in the troops because they're disgusted with their governments. It's the governments that are messing this up, not the poor soldiers that have to go and do all the fighting.
Although Max Boot, our favorite
That's
neocon,
one boot.
he wrote in one boot on the ground. He wrote in commentary today that we're probably going to have to put some special forces troops in there. So
yeah, I think they're disingenuous when they say about no boots on the ground, because, you know, whether it's Ukraine or elsewhere, we always have boots on the ground. We have CIA and special forces, and we're in so many countries. And you know, what was the base that we just flew out of in Turkey? I mean, our troops are there. Incirlik, yeah. Incirlik. And we're using that base too. And yet the Turks have been trying to be more independent. Remember, they weren't all that happy about the Iraq war. We weren't even allowed to fly over Turkey. Mm-hmm. But now, all of a sudden, you know, unfortunately, I see it not good for them, you know, to bow to our wishes, but they must be feeling pretty well squeezed. And I guess it's multiple, but, you know, they're concerned about the Kurds, they're concerned about Assad, they're concerned about ISIS. So it's a real mess, but go back 4 years, mm-hmm. and this kind of problem just didn't exist. And they wanted to. I read in one article about when they were trying to set the stage to get rid of Assad for humanitarian reasons. And I was just thinking, these humanitarian reasons didn't work out so well when you start counting how many people were killed and where we are today with chaos. And you know, the concerns that the Turks have, and rightfully so, are all the refugees coming in. I mean, that type of humanitarian concern seems to be secondary to the humanitarian concerns that we get rid of Assad and have a westernized election and to see if the next guy is friendlier to us than the one we have now.
And of course, this great army that's going to occupy this safe zone and start expanding from there. These are the 60 people that we've trained so far. So this is a great army.
That's right. And the odds of the moderates in eastern Syria will take over and win and get rid of Assad, I think, are slim to none. I think it would be Assad knows what's going on. He knows he's lost a lot of territory. He still has some support. He must still have some money. He must still have some weapons. So if they start shooting his airplanes down, you know, because he's trying to defeat ISIS or something, you know, that is when the escalation may come. And sometimes, you know, they try to anticipate. But the individuals in governments who promote these things, they always misjudge, you know, and there's so many times unintended consequences. And I'm sure when Obama said that Assad had to go, I'm sure he didn't think that in 4 years from now it might be one of the hottest spots in the whole world.
Yeah, you know, in the U.S. is in some ways like the Soviet Union of the 70s. You read the state media like the New York Times, and you can read in between the lines to see what the elites are thinking. And one thing interesting someone pointed out about this recent article about the safe zone is they're saying they want the safe zone free for the relatively moderate rebels. It's no longer moderate. And that relatively is an important word because there's been a new grouping of these rebels, and they're virtually identical to Al-Qaeda. So these are the moderates, the relatively moderates.
But it depends on the immediate battle. You know, the relative moderate might be Al-Qaeda. It might be in Afghanistan, part of the Taliban. But it might be even ISIS. It seems like ISIS at times ends up with our weapons. I mean, is it pure stupidity on our part, or do we think ISIS will serve our interests on a particular battle that's going on?
But I think people, hopefully the main thing they would take away from our discussion, which I think is most important, is this safe zone is not a little magic fairyland. This will entail the U.S. occupation of sovereign Syrian territory, which is a violation of all international laws. We've heard Kerry say how many times, we don't go in and occupy territory. This would be a huge violation, but guess what? There's somewhere else where they're not going to get any authority.
That is right. And I think this whole idea of a safe zone will do exactly the opposite. If they pursue this and demand it and get NATO involved, it will become a very unsafe zone. It will expand the chaos throughout the region, make things much worse, cost us a lot of money, and I will not be surprised if we don't see some of our troops, as Daniel said, some of our special forces are there already, and that's going to happen. It is a good time for us to say chaos is there. Nobody fully understands that. Nobody can predict the unintended consequences. But we as Americans should be able to look at this and wisely say it makes no sense for the American taxpayer and the American soldier to go over and get involved in this mess when you don't even know who your friends are and what they're fighting for. And the more we get involved, the worse it gets. We need to wake up and say we do have an answer. It's found in our Constitution. It's found on basic non-aggressive principles, and it's found on the whole idea that the American people shouldn't go to war ever unless the people have a chance to decide about it and decide through a vote on declaring war. Here this war is being expanded, and the last thing they're doing is consulting Congress or the American people. It's time for us to stand up and say we've had enough of this. Why do we have to wait until we get totally broke before it has to stop? We could stand up to this and say enough is enough. Let's quit this nonsense. Let's get out of this interventionism that we are obsessed with. I think we would all be better off, and the world would be better off, and it's one way we could work toward peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.